Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 75. For our 75th, we're looking at one of Conan Doyle's most important and influential early stories, J. Habakuk Jephson's Statement, which appeared in the Cornhill in January 1884. And here's Paul to tell us more.
There have been many theories forwarded regarding the fate of the brig Marie Celeste, found drifting derelict in December 1872. But one man, Dr. J. Habakuk Jephson, knows the truth, because he is the only known surviving passenger. Following service with the Union forces in the American Civil War, during which he was badly wounded, Jephson settled down to regular medical practice in Brooklyn. But years of overwork, weak lungs, and the lingering effect of his war wound lead his own doctor to suggest recuperation via a long sea voyage. Unfortunately, the chosen vessel is Marie Celeste, whose passenger list is expanded by the last-minute addition of the apparently wealthy Septimius Goring, a man of mysterious and sinister aspect and antecedents. At first, all goes well, until the captain's wife and child are tragically lost overboard mid-Atlantic. Following this disaster, the ship appears to be cursed.
Now, the story does contain some racist depictions and language which we will be addressing and discussing in the course of the podcast, so if this is likely to offend, then you may want to skip this episode, but otherwise, please bear with us. Now, it's no exaggeration to say that J. Habakuk Jephson's Statement was Conan Doyle's literary breakthrough. The short story was written in Southsea, we believe in the spring or summer of 1883, roughly a year after he had set up in practice at Bush Villas. Earlier that same year, he'd had success with The Captain of the Pole Star in Temple Bar magazine. And so when he came to submit J. Habakuk, he sent it to the most prestigious journal he could, the Cornhill, in June 1883. Writing to his mother, he said, "I have sent my statement of J. Habakuk Jephson, M.D., to Cornhill. May luck go with it. I could not try Temple Bar, as it is cast too much in the same lines as the Pole Star for me to have any chance." Now, his instincts were right, because the next month, James Payn, the very much admired editor of the Cornhill, accepted the story for publication and said that Conan Doyle would receive 29 guineas for the privilege. It was a significant moment for Conan Doyle, as he remembered in Memories and Adventures. "What gave me great pleasure and for the first time made me realise that I was ceasing to be a hack writer and was getting into good company was when James Payn accepted my short story Habakuk Jephson's Statement for Cornhill. I had a reverence for this splendid magazine with its traditions from Thackeray to Stevenson, and the thought that I had won my way into it pleased me even more than the cheque for £30, which came duly to hand." And there's no exaggeration in Conan Doyle's account, being accepted to a magazine that had printed so many stories he loved, including the very influential The Pavilion on the Links by Stevenson, back in 1880, and for him to be then appear in the same pages was a major validation of his abilities. Plus, £30 was quite significant for him at the time. The previous year he'd earned a total of £156, of which £42 came from writing, and yet here he had earned £30 for just one story, which was equivalent to roughly a year's rent. It also meant that he'd breached the wall of Cornhill, which from that point on printed several of his stories, including serialising The White Company in 1891, and that despite James Payn's rather dim view of historical novels. But the story that appeared in print was not quite the one that was submitted. James Payn had offered some editorial notes which Conan Doyle very wisely took on board. So when submitting his revised draft, he wrote, I've condensed the beginning, as you suggest, have made a few alterations in dates and details, and have laid more stress upon Dr. Jephson's reasons for not making his statements sooner. I have omitted the death of Martha, the old black woman, as it has no direct bearing on the story and distracts attention from the sequence of events. So we get a picture that the Cornhill Commission not only gave him confidence and cash, it also helped him to hone his skills. But what it didn't do is it didn't give him any fame, because the story appeared in January 1884 anonymously, as was the editorial policy of the Cornhill. Robert Louis Stevenson was another author whose work had appeared uncredited. But oddly, this led to a further endorsement of Conan Doyle's skills when one reviewer felt the story could only have been written by the author of The New Arabian Nights. And we'll come on to the reception of the story in a moment, but for now it's enough to say that after the Cornhill, it appeared in the Boston Herald on the 3rd of April 1885, where it was printed as a true story, and it was then anthologized in the unofficial Dreamland and Ghostland anthology in 1887, and soon after in Conan Doyle's own The Captain of the Pole Star and Other Tales in 1890. And though Conan Doyle would later imply that the writing of the story was in some way irresponsible, it nevertheless was a very major milestone in his career, so pretty fitting for our 75th.
Yeah, it's the original printing of this story. It is a really interesting thing to go into, and the reaction. Conan Doyle, we know, did keep reviews. He did read reviews, and in a letter to his mother from January 1884, he's noticed a number of the reviews, but one is particularly interesting. He quotes it in detail.
Mm,
And Mark, you've already referred to this slightly, and it was the Illustrated London News of January the 6th. Which says Cornhill begins the new year well with an exceedingly powerful story in which we seem to trace the hand of the author of the New Arabian Nights. And
mhm,
as you said, Mark, this is Robert Louis Stevenson,
mm,
and the New Arabian Nights was published in 1882, so
mm,
it's still a pretty fresh, a fresh story at that time. Um, J. Habakuk Jephson's statement is a conception which may well have been inspired by the weird voyage and savage catastrophe of Poe's Arthur Gordon Pym,
mm,
and only inferior to Poe in the power of compelling belief. We are less absolutely under the spell and feel more disposed to be critical of Jephson's mere improbabilities than of the impossibilities of Pym's Antarctic adventure. But the story is powerfully fascinating nevertheless. And some
mm,
really interesting things going on there. But one that the reviewer is basically quite rightly saying that at this point Poe is the more powerful writer.
mm,
His story may be uh, less believable, but because of his writing, you're carried along with it.
mm.
And it is really improbable situation after improbable situation in Arthur Gordon Pym. And you have, as he said, got improbabilities in Jephson,
Yeah.
but it is a bit more believable than all the various things which happened to Arthur Gordon Pym. But it is interesting that the reviewer has picked up on this influence of Poe
Yeah.
on Conan Doyle, but of course he doesn't know it's Conan Doyle.
Mm,
This way, he doesn't know this is a new young writer. He's actually saying that he thinks it's Stevenson. And basically he thinks he's saying that Poe's better than Stevenson
yeah,
in
yeah.
this respect, which lends another edge to it.
Mm,
So it's all there in this review, and I think this is why he spotted this and quoted it at length to his mother.
yes.
So it really, as you say, he's got his foot in the door
Yeah.
with this one quite definitely at this stage.
And it should be said at this point that, there's been quite a lot of recent work done on this story. So a big shout out to Joanne Alberstadt, the co-editor of Canadian Homes, who's done quite a lot of work on J. Habakuk Jephson's statement recently. So we'll be plodding over a bit of ground that I think Joanne's done very well already. So it's worth just getting what really happened, or what is believed to have happened,
Hmm.
in place first. So the Marie Celeste was a American merchant ship. It was originally Canadian. It had set off from New York bound for Genoa in Italy with a cargo of alcohol on the 7th of November 1872. And the crew included Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7. Then on the 4th of December, a Canadian brigantine called De Gratia, captained by David Morehouse, found the Mary Celeste adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean a little way off the Azores near Portugal. The ship itself was said to be seaworthy. It was under partial sail, but there was nobody aboard, and her lifeboat was missing. And the last log entry was for the 25th of November, some 9 days earlier. It's often said that the ship was undisturbed, but that's not entirely true. The captain's sextant and the compass were missing, as was the ship's register. There was 3 feet of water in the hold, although that shouldn't have been anything to really worry about. But the crew had left their oilskins and pipes, which suggests that they had left the ship in a hurry. So the Dei Gratia then declared the Mary Celeste salvage and towed it to Gibraltar, and we'll pick up the story of what happened to it when it arrived at Gibraltar later. That's essentially the narrative, but of course it created this enormous mystery.
It's one I could give you an example here. It's a story I'll be coming back to later as well when talk more about the literary context.
Mm.
But it's a 1932 story called "The Ship of Silence" by Albert R. Wetien, which is about the discovery of a derelict. And it's an old sailor spinning this yarn, telling the story. But in that, you really get almost an encapsulation of the Mary Celeste. Mention that when this old sailor is giving examples of ships found derelict, and then he's talking about the Mary Celeste here, and then of course there was the Mary Celeste in the 70s. I suppose she's the classic of what I'm trying to say. They found her in mid-Atlantic in calm weather, you'll remember, with all the usual signs of mystery. Everything in order. Hull and spars sound, fair weather sails set, not a lifeboat missing. Everything as it should be, except she had no crew. What makes her case a classic are the number of altogether peculiar features. There were the men's clothes hung on a line to dry. Breakfast half eaten was in the forecastle and the main cabin tables, and the food was still good, proving she had not long been abandoned. Under the needle of a sewing machine in the captain's room was a child's dress half finished, where the captain's wife had obviously hurriedly left it. Then they found a cutlass in its scabbard with stains like blood on the blade, and on the rail in the starboard bow they found a deep new cut with stains about it also. Cut into the bow itself, a little above the waterline, were 2 deep grooves gouged out each side, as it were, and quite fresh. Most curious of all, the only thing missing on board was the chronometer. But again, why? Why? So it's just got it. It's all encapsulated there. You've got myths sewn in there. There were clothes hanging on the line, not true. There were meals that were almost half eaten and almost fresh.
Yeah.
All these are kind of the myths that built up here. He says there was no the lifeboat was still there. Wrong. There was the yawl missing. So it just builds up, and then you'll get stories like this. It just feeds on itself, as these things always do.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we might come back to later is that the Strand magazine ran a competition, didn't they, in July 1913 to ask people for their best explanation of what happened, and the great suggestion was that everybody fell off into the water, was eaten by sharks.
It was, I think they were all supposed to be watching something, weren't they? They'd all gone onto a platform.
On a gantry,
the whole crew and the captain's family, and it just fell off. And as you say, they were lost. So I think Conan Doyle scotched that one.
Yeah, well, we all know it was the Daleks anyway. So,
Yes.
and we know that Conan Doyle did know about the story. We know that actually he read coverage of the case of the Mary Celeste at the time when he was a student at Stonyhurst, because he says as much in an interview with Robert Barr for McClure's in November 1894, which is one of his first recorded interviews. He told Barr that he'd read an account of it at the time, and it made a powerful impression on his young mind. And it set the future Sherlock Holmes at work trying to find a solution for it. There was no clue to go on except an old Spanish sword found in the forecastle, which showed signs of having been recently cleaned. So yet again, you're getting already this kind of fabrications. And then when Conan Doyle comes to write his version of the solution, he makes all manner of changes and alterations to the story, some of which we think may be deliberate, some of them might well be just accident.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as we've mentioned, the first thing he did was change the name of the ship, and that's probably the most lasting influence of this story. that it still happens today. You still get people calling it the Marie Celeste rather than the Mary Celeste. So he's kind of gone down in mystery history
Mm.
in that way. He also gets his date wrong. It's actually December 1872 it was found rather than 1873 as he states. He gets his bearings quite close. He's
Not
relatively
far off.
close-ish on that one. The names of the captain's name is wrong. He's given the name Tibbs rather than Briggs,
Hmm.
and the girl is changed to a son. So instead of Sophie Matilda, we have it as a son.
Mm. And Sophie Matilda Briggs is a name that we'll recognize from the Sherlock Holmes stories because
Mm,
the Matilda Briggs is the ship that's associated with the giant rat of Sumatra.
mm. It's always assumed, oh, this is just Conan Doyle being his usual slipshod self
Mm.
and being quite careless. But as you've already touched on, Mark, he was obviously asked to make some changes
Yeah.
by James Payn. Now I don't know how much Payn knew about the actual mystery of the Mary Celeste, and this isn't. It's still relatively recent, within the last decade or so. There was another comment that Doyle makes in a letter to his mother, again in the January 1884, where he says, Habakkuk is going to make a sensation. I've had several letters in praise of it. Yesterday came one from James Payn, asking me how much foundation there was for my striking story. One, you think Payn would have asked him that before he'd
Before.
published it.
Yes.
Um, and it also makes you wonder how much Payne was au fait with the actual the real life story with that comment. And it also brings into question why he was asking Doyle to make those changes,
Yeah.
or what changes he actually asked Doyle. Did Doyle then make certain things off his own bat, thinking, "Ooh, I'd better, this is a real life mystery. I'd better tread carefully." So that in
Mm.
itself becomes a bit of a mystery
Yeah.
as to what's going on here, and it might be that we've been condemning Doyle over the years too much for all his careless mistakes,
Yes. Yes.
whereas they are deliberate. I mean, there's one mistake which is very, very definitely sheer carelessness, and that's where he's talking about Jephson's American Civil War service.
Oh, yeah.
Where we have Jephson saying, I was present at the Second Battle of Bull's Run, which means Bull Run,
Yeah.
and at the Battle of Gettysburg. Finally, I was severely wounded at Antietam. The chronology is a bit out there because the Battle of Gettysburg was fought over 3 days in July 1863, whereas the Battle of Antietam was 2 days in September 1862.
Yeah.
So black mark to the beak who taught Conan Doyle history on that one. But that really is an example of sheer carelessness. But
Yeah.
the ones relating to the Mary Celeste, we don't really know.
Yeah. We don't. We don't.
Mm.
And just to return to the historical Mary Celeste and what happened, it all started when the Dei Gratia came back to Gibraltar. And a couple of things happened. First of all, the news started to get out. There was the unusual nature of her circumstance in which the Mary Celeste was found. And soon rumours started to spread of foul play, including spread by Lloyd's of London, who, of course, had a vested interest in this, being the
Mm.
principal insurers in the case. But the real reason why it all becomes sort of blown up is because of a wonderful gentleman by the name of Frederick Solly Flood, who was the Attorney General for Gibraltar, who is, well, frankly, he's a bit of a lunatic. But the US consul at the time, a chap called Spragg, had a wonderful description of Solly Flood. He said, he has always been considered an individual of very vivid imagination, and to have survived, to some extent at least, the judicious application of his mental faculties. Such is, I believe, the general opinion of the community at large, even among his most intimate and personal friends. So Solly Flood opened salvage hearings on the 17th of December 1872, and on the 23rd of December he ordered a special survey of the Mary Celeste from a surveyor of shipping and a diver, and they produced these very extensive reports, which you can read in great detail. There's an excellent book on this by Paul Begg called Mary Celeste: The Greatest Mystery of the Sea, in which he prints most of these reports. But Solly Flood's summary of the discoveries to the Board of Trade was partial at best, and he tried to push a charge of murder on the high seas, but that was scotched very quickly by one of the medics on Gibraltar.
He basically he should have been a writer, probably
Yes,
of cheap fiction. He'd probably been
yes.
very good at that. Because as you say, my own theory or guess is that the crew got at the alcohol and, in the fury of drunkenness, murdered the master and wife and child and the chief mate. That they then damaged the bows of the vessel with the view of giving it the appearance of having struck on rocks or suffered from a collision, so as to induce the master of any vessel which might pick them up if they saw her at some distance to think her not worth attempting to save, and that they did sometime between the 25th of November and the 5th of December escape on board some vessel bound for some North or South American port or the West Indies. It's he's gone off. He's gone off on a mental frolic of his own here, and just make up these stories because he has various things. He's got that idea, but then he also wants to accuse the crew of the Dei Gratia of basically being pirates and
Yeah,
doing away with the crew of the Marie Celeste. So he's quite clearly a fantasist.
yeah,
But as you've said, the other reports gave a very sober account, and I think there was an American naval officer brought in as well, and he gave a very sober
yes.
account of what he thought had happened, Flood just tries to fight against all this, but wiser voices and more sensible heads do prevail.
Mm.
In the end, I think one of the best judgments on Flood comes from the from Owen Dudley Edwards in his Quest for Sherlock Holmes, where basically just calls Flood an egregious ass.
But it does, I mean, it is his intervention really that permanently fuses the Mary Celeste in this halfway house between fact and fiction, isn't
Mm,
it? I mean,
mm,
it all comes back down to him. So when the Boston Herald picks up J. Habakuk Jephson's statement and prints it in its 3rd of April 1885 issue, it does so as a true account under the
mm,
headline Strange Tale of the Sea, Remarkable Voyage of the Brig Marie Celeste. A missing crew and what became of them, a mystery explained after many years. Even in 1885, you're talking less than, 15 months after it was first published,
mm,
Conan Doyle's story has already got the status of being a true tale.
mm,
And that's why he later says that maybe it was a bit irresponsible, which I think is being a bit hard on himself, really, in that case. Poe was
mm.
very happy to write things that were hoaxes. And
Yeah, well, as is pointed out elsewhere, the balloon hoax by Poe, he deliberately put real characters into that, like Harrison Ainsworth,
mm,
in order to fool people. And Poe would have been delighted to have done this,
yeah,
to have actually written a story and got this sort of reaction from officialdom. It would have made his day, quite
yeah,
definitely, and he would have for all that Poe was a difficult character, he would have worked out that Flood was a fool and deserved
yeah,
to have
yeah,
his
yeah.
leg pulled. But curiously enough, with Habakkuk Jephson's statement, it wasn't just Flood that was fooled. The American consul you've mentioned, Sprague, he actually sensible chap,
Mm,
but even he was taken in by this.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's astonishing, really, because you'd think they would notice that this story is so melodramatic. It's
Yes,
such a
quite.
farrago
Yes.
that how on earth, and they should surely have noticed that all the facts, or so many of those facts, were wrong that we've just mentioned. It is astonishing how this was taken seriously for a moment by these officials.
And it's even more staggering that Spragg, or indeed any other contemporary, could have read the story and have thought that it was real when you consider the literary influences on the story, because Conan Doyle's not writing something hugely original at this time. There are so many other things in the ether that he's drawing on from the world of fiction.
Yeah, I mean, sea stories at the time, and particularly kind of violent sea stories and these adventurous sea stories were hugely popular. I mean, we even have Sherlock Holmes commenting to Dr. Watson on Watson's love of the sea stories of Clark Russell.
Hmm.
The main influence on this is probably the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, published in
Yeah.
1838. And the Boston newspaper printing of Habakuk Jephson that you just mentioned gives him this long subtitle.
Yes.
Is very close as well
Very,
to
very Poe.
Arthur Gordon Pym, where you get this extremely long of his adventures, and it just gives the whole story in the
In
subtitle.
the, yeah, that's right.
But it's also when you look at the timing, we've mentioned in that Illustrated London News review about how the reviewer thought this story might have been written by the author of the New Arabian Nights. But after the New Arabian Nights, Stevenson then produced in 1883 Treasure Island,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
the many ways the ultimate of these
absolutely.
sea adventures, and it has a mutiny at sea when
Yep.
Silver and his men take over the Hispaniola. If Doyle was an early reader of Treasure Island, and I suspect he might have been, that probably also plays in here. The huge popularity of Treasure Island. I think all we need in Habakkuk Jephson's statement is a map
Yeah, that's right.
to make it perfect.
Actually, that reminds me, there's also another influence on Conan Doyle he mentioned in his youthful days was Smollett, wasn't it? It was Roderick Random,
Mm,
and
mm,
that has a particularly violent scene at Mutiny at Sea as well, if I remember
mm.
rightly.
It's a real trope, and they know this will bring readers in, and Doyle was particularly good at it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, in 1893, we've got the Sherlock Holmes story, which is more of an adventure story than a Sherlock Holmes story in the whole, the Gloria Scott,
Yeah, yeah,
which has a
yeah.
very, very bloody mutiny, very graphically described. So Doyle's very good at this, and later in 1899, he does a story which is only published in an American newspaper, The Tragedy of Flowery Land,
Mm,
which is based on an actual mutiny at sea, and might have been one of his kind of true crime
yes,
stories, which we've covered earlier, but wasn't included in the Strand series.
yeah,
We will go into the story itself in detail shortly. But the solution he has for this does lie around mutiny and human agency.
yes.
But there were various theories thrown up about the Mary Celeste, that the crew might have been victims of some monster of the deep. And you can kind of see that Conan Doyle would have made a good go at that as well when you look at his story, The Fiend of the Cooperage,
Oh, yes,
which is
yeah,
it's a monster on land, but you could see
yeah,
that
yeah.
being transferred to a ship very easily. But there were some really good examples of this, but the best, in my opinion, came after Habakkuk Jephson, a Tropical Horror by William Hope Hodgson, which was published in
Hmm.
1905, is an absolutely brilliant, visceral account
Hmm.
of a sea monster, getting itself on a ship and wiping out the crew one
Yeah,
by one, and it's
horrific.
just brilliantly done. And the story I've just mentioned, The Ship of Silence by Albert R. Wetjen, has
Mm,
a similar thing where a derelict is found. And Wetjen, as I've said, was clever enough to bring in real life mysteries to give verisimilitude
yeah.
to the story he's going to tell. And this derelict is found, and all the crew are all missing, and on the deck is a ship's cat flattened like a pancake. So they know something's been on here. And as the salvagers get aboard, they hear screams and shouts of "It's coming for us!" and they can't understand where this is. And there's a parrot, and the parrot has seen it all and
Love
is
it.
it's recorded it and is shouting about it, and so it make the crew obviously get the jumps with this, and it's just brilliantly written. So that could have been something else. Conan Doyle could have gone
Love it.
along those lines, and he'd have made a very good job of that as well. Mm,
Okay, let's get into the meat of the story itself now, then. And the opening of the story, after establishing that this is going to be about the case of the Marie Celeste, is our introduction to the lead character, who is the well-known Brooklyn specialist on consumption, Dr. Habakuk Jephson,
mm,
who we are told is Doctor of Medicine of the University of Harvard and ex-consulting physician of the Samaritan Hospital of Brooklyn. We get a bit of his background as a son of a preacher in Lowell, New England. He's a very confirmed abolitionist. He's written a pamphlet, in fact, called Where Is Thy Brother? which is about as standard a title for an abolitionist pamphlet as you can get, having read hundreds of them in my
it's
PhD years.
a perfect pastiche.
It is indeed. And all of that comes from an individual who we'll come on to later, Henry Highland Garnet, an abolitionist who Conan Doyle met in West Africa. But we also get this interesting aside that he served in the Civil War, and it reminded me a bit of the character in The Surgeon of Gastafel, who similarly had a military history.
Yeah, it's quite clear. Conan Doyle obviously had an interest in the American Civil War. Like a number of British writers, John Buchan, for instance, was also
Mm,
hugely interested in the American Civil
mm.
War. And we're also talking at this point, it's recent history.
Yeah, it is.
This is
Yeah,
only 20 years ago, so people will be very conversant. And it's just also it's fleshing out Jephson's character.
yeah,
So he's, as you said, he's from an abolitionist background. So you would get a lot of these fired up young men, going into the Union Army for very ideological reasons. And obviously he's a doctor as well, so he's attached to, is it the 113th, I think, New York
yeah.
Regiment.
That's right.
That he's their regimental surgeon. As I pointed out earlier, unfortunately, Doyle does get some of the chronology a little bit mixed up, but at least he gives the battles for this story, and it's convincingly placed.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I was quite interested by this little aside that he's also said that he would probably have perished on the field had it not been for the kindness of a gentleman named Murray, who had me carried to his house and provided me with every comfort. Now, who is this Murray? Because we
Yes.
have a Watson has an orderly called Murray who saves him
Mm.
at my one. So, well, obviously this is a reference to something he's drawing on.
Yeah, yeah. We're doing a dress rehearsal here.
Yeah, we are.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so we have him wounded badly at Antietam, or Sharpsburg, as it's also known, and then this rather odd nursing back to health
Mm.
scenario.
Yeah, he does. And this is where you get introduced to Martha, who's the nursemaid on a plantation who helps Jeffson recover. And she's an elderly woman. She's very near death, but she's in possession of this precious black stone that she decides she's going to gift to Jeffson because she believes he's the only person who can be trusted with it, which is a damning verdict on her black kinfolk and a reflection of the kind of Victorian values that underpin this story. And would have it that the only person who can be trusted with this object is a white person. And the description of this peculiar object is it was intensely black, of extreme hardness and oval in shape, just such a flat stone as one would pick up on the seashore if one wished to throw a long way. It was about 3 inches long and an inch and a half broad at the middle, but rounded off at the extremities. The most curious part about it were several well-marked ridges which ran in semicircles over its surface and gave it exactly the appearance of a human ear. And we later discovered that he had shared this with a friend of his, who's Professor Schroeder at the New York Institute, who says it has come from a piece of meteoric stone, but suspects that it has been worked as an ear and probably broken off from some larger statue. So note that one for later.
Yeah, it's just as you pointed out at the start, some of this does read uncomfortably. It's
Mm,
it's it's all very stereotyped, and you've got this community. Obviously, at this point, there's no way Conan Doyle himself has not visited. He's getting this all second hand from, because he's not visited an actual plantation. So you get all this just full of what would like to be kind of seen as Gone with the Wind
yes,
stereotyping, and also straight away have this interest, introduce this idea of what almost a fetish
yes,
with this object. So we are very much again in the territory of almost pulp fiction
yes,
and simplification here.
absolutely,
Mm,
absolutely. And then we get to the kind of middle part of the story, which is the long sea voyage.
mm,
Jeffson's essentially been diagnosed with a lung condition, and he's encouraged to take a voyage, which in itself would not have been unusual for the time. I mean,
mm,
Kipling himself was told to do this, went to America in the
mm,
Antipodes, and Jeffson meets a chap called Russell of the firm White, Russell and White, who offer him passage on the Marie Celeste starting from Boston. And it's there that we're introduced to this really interesting character who's called Septimus Goring.
Yeah, so there's this character, Septimus Goring, who's well dressed, in a flashy way.
Hmm.
We're given that straight away. So there's obviously we're meant to see this character is wealthy and vulgar.
Yeah.
But we also get the fact that he is very clearly of mixed race.
Yes.
And this is actually told. The description is not easy to read these days,
No.
because it is very much of its time and of its type.
Yeah.
He's sold as a villain,
Yes.
basically, in the description. Yet, as we'll see as the story goes on, Jephson is not very good at judging this entirely.
No.
But the main thing he notices, and again, we've got this is another one of the classic tropes, is that his right hand is missing. It's only got a thumb
Yes.
and is missing all the fingers. So this is another real trope of this sort of fiction. There's a history here, and it's probably a bad history and a bad sort of a bad history.
Yes. Yes.
But he gives what really strikes is this description of the hand looking like a sponge.
Oh, yes.
Really, I mean that's straight. We're straight into horror fiction
Yeah, we are.
with that one. But yes, the character is clearly marked out as this is going to be the central
Yes.
the central villain of the piece.
Yeah, and he's got an
Mm.
interesting name, Septimus Goring,
Mm, mm,
because I mean that immediately reminded me of Decimus Saxon in Micah Clarke. It has that same sort of cadence, and obviously
mm,
the Latin root of the name, the first name as well. But you spotted
mm.
something else.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it'd be interesting to know, first of all, whether there's something symbolic in Septimus and seven, and whether that has a symbolism that is meant to be read. I'm not sure.
No.
And then with Goring, it's going to, as we later find out, it's going to describe something of his character.
Mm.
But also, I wonder when you say, Mark, about the Micah Clarke reflection here,
Mm.
that if Doyle is thinking about the British 17th century and the Civil War period, there actually was a royalist general called Lord George Goring.
Mm.
So I don't know whether that is
Maybe.
he's taken the name there, but it is also again symbolic because it's going to describe what this character's like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
So Septimus Goring has joined the passage,
mm,
and Habakuk Jephson takes up his cabin, which is next to Goring, and it's opposite Captain Tibbs,
mm,
as he's called in this story, and another passenger, John Harton, who is also attached to the shipping firm.
mm,
But before they set off, the captain has to take on board two black sailors when two of his once reliable men failed to turn up. And this is
mm.
one of those, the first little, well, the second maybe sign of things are not quite right with this voyage, which seems to fly entirely over Jephson's head all throughout the story, it has to be said.
Well, it also makes there's this unconvincing. I mean, I know it's the story is what it is, but the idea that Captain Tibbs would just readily take on two of these kind of wharf rats who he doesn't know,
Yeah.
it doesn't convince. I'm
No,
afraid.
no, I think that's fair. I think
It's
that's
just-
fair to say.
Mm,
And then we get this rather lovely description as the ship sails. I stood upon the poop watching the lowland of America sinking gradually upon the horizon until the evening haze hid it from my sight. A single red light, however, continued to blaze balefully behind us, throwing a long track like a trail of blood upon the water, and it is still visible as I write, though reduced to a mere speck. So, omens circulating.
warnings.
Here we go.
Mhm.
And then we get another bit of suspicion around Goring when he is found in the captain's cabin looking at the maps and the equipment. And Conan Doyle handles this bit quite well, actually, because he almost diverts you very quickly onto the fact that Goring has a lot of knowledge about navigation and about equipment, and so much so that he says Goring had a discussion with the captain upon the variation of the compass And when we came back to the ocean currents, he showed a thorough grasp of the subject. So, we get in a sense that this chap has got much more knowledge than we might have originally thought. And it's at this point that Jephson starts to regard Goring as a subject of study.
You can see what's being set up here, and the fact that this guy's just come on as a passenger, yet seems to have a good deal of nautical knowledge and
Yeah.
seems to be using it pretty quickly.
Yes.
Again, I'm not. I found one of the least convincing characters in this is Captain Tibbs,
Yeah. He just fades
who's
into the
just
background.
yes, and it just doesn't seem to no warnings ring with him at all.
No.
Mm,
No, that's quite right. And Jephson observes that Goring is mixing freely and easily with the other black passengers on the ship, which might sound a bit unusual to us, but he's drawn the distinction that um, Goring is a mixed race character. And there were
mm.
certainly examples on the British plantations, at least, of individuals of mixed race not wanting to be seen with black people for fear of reprisals. And from this point on, Goring becomes something of a point of fascination for Jephson.
So observing Goring then becomes Jason's new hobby on this. I mean, it seems to work both ways because Goring steps into Jeffson's cabin and stares at him a bit as well, and then Jeffson finds that he can look through a kind of crack between their in the wall between their cabins and
Yes.
sees Goring hard at work over plans and maps and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's a dramatic incident occurs where there's 1.4. Fortunately, Jephson isn't in his bed at the time, but there's a huge explosion, and he finds that if he'd been sleeping in his bed, he would have been shot
Yes.
because Goring in his cabin next door had been cleaning his gun, and he hadn't realised that it was loaded. Of course, Jephson accepts this reasoning, but as I say, with so many of these characters, alarm bells just don't seem to ring.
No.
It's difficult to read the story without getting frustrated.
Yes. Well, he's even worse
Um,
than that. He says, Goring, poor fellow, didn't know I
yes,
had gone on deck that day and must
yes.
therefore have felt terribly frightened.
Terribly disappointed. Yes.
Yes.
Um, and then comes another thing with the captain's wife and son
Mm,
disappear, and
mm.
this is where it begins to get really dark and serious, and they just vanish,
Yes.
and that then sets in motion the real the downward spiral,
Yes.
and this becomes the voyage into hell.
Mm.
Which then the captain himself seems to shut himself off, and there's another explosion, and you find out that he's apparently committed suicide.
Yes, although
Um,
Goring is found over him, isn't he,
yes,
standing over him,
yes,
looking down at the dead body.
yeah.
Um, but it's a pretty grim scene, this one.
Oh yeah.
It was a hideous sight, for the whole front of his face was blown in, and the little room was swimming in blood. The pistol was lying beside him on the floor just as it had dropped from his hand. He'd evidently put it to his mouth before pulling the trigger. I mean, it's
Mm.
pretty horrendous stuff.
Oh, and Doyle seems to revel in this sort of
Yeah,
thing. Uh, just to say, rereading the Gloria Scott with with the mutiny scenes, and there's an awful lot of this,
yes,
and it's pretty graphic.
yeah,
Saying he takes an absolute delight in it is overstating it, but he makes sure he's again. I don't know whether this is the medical background coming in as well, because he can describe things, but it's definitely the boy's own adventure story.
yes.
Certainly, a certain type of his reader will love this stuff.
And then you get, by now the reader is very suspicious of Goring, I think. And so you get an attempt to kind of slightly redirect people because Harton discovers a scrapbook and proposes a theory that Goring is really a detective, that that he is after some criminal who's got away to Portugal and that he chooses this peculiar way of travel that he may arrive unnoticed and pounce upon his quarry unawares. And Jephson says, to his credit, I think the supposition is rather a far-fetched one.
But it's a very nice reversal.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
It's actually this is Doyle doing the wrong footing thing. It's it's one of the cleverer aspects of the story, and it's just again Doyle having a lot of fun here, and the fact that we know that Doyle will then later go on to create one of the greatest detectives in fiction makes it even better.
Yeah, but this book that Harton's discovered is really this really should be setting off alarm bells now. It was a sort of scrapbook, it seems, and contained a large number of newspaper cuttings. All these cuttings related to murders which had been committed at various times in the States during the last 20 years or so. The curious thing which Harton observed about them, however, was that they were invariably murders the authors of which had never been brought to justice. So there we go. But I have to say, for all we're having a bit of fun with the kind of
Mm,
heavy-handedness of it, as with all of these kind of stories which get very melodramatic, Conan Doyle often has these moments that just sort of drop into place and you think, gosh, that's really, really good. And the one that I really love is this rather wonderful moment where Goring gets into Jephson's cabin, but he first appears at the cabin window, which is illuminated from behind. And this is the description. As I lay, I kept my drowsy eyes upon this circle, and was conscious that it was gradually becoming less well defined as my senses left me, when I was suddenly recalled to full wakefulness by the appearance of a small dark object in the very centre of the luminous disk. I lay quietly and breathlessly watching it. Gradually it grew larger and plainer, and then I perceived that it was a human hand which had been cautiously inserted through the chink of the half-closed door, a hand which, as I observed with a thrill of horror, was not provided with fingers.
mm.
That's just great stuff, this, isn't it? I
Yeah,
love that.
it's why as we constantly talked about on the podcast, it's why he's so good at the gothic stuff, and that is pure gothic horror.
Yeah.
And it's got a touch where you were mentioning Maupassant earlier.
Mm.
It's got a touch of, to me, of that sort of more French European
Good
horror
point.
story to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of the opposite you get in say W.F. Harvey's The Beast with Five Fingers, the idea of a hand with
Yeah.
all its fingers but without the arm attached.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the opposite.
Yes.
It really is nightmarish.
Mm. And this all happens on the eve of them sort of arriving into Lisbon, or what they believe is Lisbon. But before we get there, Jephson has a conversation with Harton, one of the few remaining people who survived this voyage, about this black stone that he inherited from Martha at the beginning of the tale. And this attracts Goring's interest, and you get this exchange whereby Goring is trying to suggest that this whole thing is not important and it should just be thrown overseas. But the evidence of all the black sailors on the ship is that they treat it with some form of reverence.
Mm.
So now we have this strong sense that, and even Jephson has this strong sense that this stone means something.
It's very much, it comes back to what I said earlier with the idea of it as a fetish.
Mm.
It's interesting that Goring himself is willing to throw it in the sea,
Yes.
which, as the story progresses, seems it would have been an odd thing for him to do.
Yeah. I think there is a big plot hole in
Mm,
this story around this thing, but
mm,
let's get to that because we're into the last third of the story now. Harton and Jephson are on the deck. They come out and they look to Lisbon and discover, in fact, they're on West Africa.
mm,
Hyson is exceedingly mortified at the occurrence and protests that the instruments have been tampered with. There is no doubt that this is the mainland of Africa and that it was really the peak of Tenerife which we saw some days
mm,
ago upon the northern horizon. Now, it should be said that this middle passage sequence has all been told in diary form. And for the last third of the story, Conan Doyle, I think, very sensibly switches back to Jephson's statement direct,
mm,
because obviously everything's going to start coming out at this point. Jephson is called on deck by Goring and is overpowered. And at that point, he discovers that Harton has been murdered as well.
mm,
And so now we know that Goring has had this plan all along to capture the ship, to take it to West Africa for whatever reason. The ship is boarded, and again, the stone becomes important at this point because Goring would rather have Jephson killed, but the people who come onto the ship discover the stone, realize
mm,
its importance, and at that point, um, they are all taken back to a stockade on the shore, where we discover that the stone is indeed the ear of a much larger statue. A remarkable
Mm,
coincidence, it has to be said.
mm,
This story is, Conan Doyle is not usually quite so heavy-handed with his coincidences, but this is a story that entirely depends on massive coincidences, I think.
hmm Yes,
Uh,
because there's absolutely obviously the ear doesn't come out till late in the voyage. There's no way that Goring knows
yeah,
Jephson has this thing, and it just happens to fit the idol where Goring's going.
yes.
But this is stretching improbability just
It, it,
that
it is.
that bit too far.
It is a bit.
Mm,
And it's worth just pointing out here that we get a bit more detail about this statue and particularly the material it's made from. Goring reveals that the peoples of West Africa who have this statue were originally, as he describes them, Mahometans. And says that when Muhammad himself was still alive, there was a schism, and that some of the followers moved away from Arabia and eventually crossed Africa. And they took with them a valuable relic of their faith in the shape of a large piece of the black stone of
mm,
Mecca. So all of this is a reference to the Kaaba, which is the most sacred site in Islam. It's the direction to which all Muslims pray, and it's the site of the Hajj, the great pilgrimage that all Muslims should take in their lifetime if they can do so. In the Muslim tradition, it's the first temple built by Adam, which was destroyed by the flood and then rebuilt by Abraham. After which the Arab tribes reverted to form of polytheism until the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century, who removed the other idols and restored the temple. And then the temple was subsequently destroyed, rebuilt several times. But one of the things that Muhammad had built into I think it's the Eastern Wall, was this famous black stone, the most sacred relic in the Muslim tradition, and that in itself has had this amazing checkered history because it has been damaged, stolen, ransomed, broken up, reformed, and it is there to this day, encased in a silver frame. And so, one wonders how Conan Doyle came to know about this. But one of the possible sources for this is somebody that we've mentioned on the podcast a few times before, the great Victorian explorer Sir Richard Burton.
yes, and Burton himself in disguise, one of his most famous feats was disguising himself and going on the Hajj and visiting Mecca.
Mm,
And we know that Doyle was interested in Burton, and he will have read this account or certainly versions of it, and that's probably where this comes from. I think the origins lie in Burton.
mm,
And we know that Doyle was definitely interested in this because later during the Great Hiatus, Sherlock Holmes himself, he copies this feat and
yes,
looks in at Mecca, as he so casually puts it. So that's where this will probably come from. As we've said many a time with Doyle, it's kind of this grab bag of ideas
yes,
get thrown into stories and all kinds of elements. I mean, with this one where you've got that as the ending, what on earth, where did that come from?
mm,
It's that sort of thing. But it's because he's blending all these ideas and things he's learned about, and how can I get that in a story?
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
quite sure. And there's also another link here with Burton, in that Burton was the consul for Fernando Po,
Oh, yes,
which is
yeah,
on this West African
yeah, of
coastline.
course,
So Burton knew that. He knew Dahomey very well
yeah,
on
yeah,
this coastline. So Burton ties those together as well. So I think there's an element of that as become mixed into this story.
yeah,
And it's almost like, yeah, again, it's a classic. Once more, we're back to Pulp Fiction and the classic lost tribe
yes,
sort of story is what you've got going on here. Again, this is Rider Haggard stuff.
yes, yeah, yeah. And it's at this point that we get Goring's statement of the case. We get the explanation for what he's been up to.
Mm.
And indeed, the scrapbook that Horton discovered was the index of all of the crimes that he had committed. But the reason for his crimes are interesting. And it turns out that Goring was mutilated by a white man. His father was white, his mother was a slave. When his father died, his mother was sold again, and he saw her lashed to death. He has this horrible aside, my young wife too, oh, my young
Mhm.
wife. A shudder ran through his whole frame, and then Nothing is explained further than that. And then he goes on, no matter, I swore my oath and I kept it. From Maine to Florida and from Boston to San Francisco, you could track my steps by sudden deaths which baffled the police. I warred against the whole white race as they for centuries had warred against the black one. Now, all of this is reflective of classic white British plantation fears, this idea that there would be a black uprising that would wipe out the white oppressors. And in that sense, it's reflective of that imperial Gothic trope that we've talked about so many times before. But it's also, as Owen Dudley Edwards has pointed out, a case where Conan Doyle is putting before a genteel British audience the sins that they have committed in slave ownership. So this is one of those parts of the story where it becomes a little bit more complex than it might appear on the surface.
But a lot of it sits uncomfortably.
Oh yeah, gosh,
Because you're talking within the framework of essentially pulp fiction, melodramatic fiction here. So you're following those rules. As I say, right from the start, when we first meet Goring,
mm,
as a villain.
yeah,
He is signaled as a villain from the start, and then we get this slight swerve where the idea, oh, he might be a detective.
yeah,
But all the way, this is the way he is portrayed. You're pretty much sure as a reader that you are going in this direction,
mm,
and it's where the things clash because you do have the bit you just mentioned where Goring talks about his wife, and you get no details, and that's as it should be
yeah, yeah,
with that. So you get a sudden moment almost of melodrama and subtlety together.
yeah,
So a lot of this just sits uncomfortably.
yeah,
It's an odd story in that, yeah, where we were talking about the Cornhill earlier. So we got this melodramatic, pulpy sort of story going into a quality literary magazine. And so it's just there's dichotomy throughout this whole thing, and things are clashing all the time.
yeah, and some of the most racist sentiments expressed in the story are actually expressed by Goring as well, and we get this right towards the end here that
Mm,
actually
mm,
his great plan is that he says these stupid adopted children of mine. But he's under no doubt that actually the population are beneath him
mm,
in every single way. So it's a very complicated picture, but it's riddled with Victorian views of black people from the period,
mm.
and so this is where we get to the end of the story. Goring essentially realizes that while the stone is there, Jephson is protected, and Goring can't command the people, so he comes up with a third option, which is to essentially encourage Jephson to escape, and so
Mhm.
he prepares for him a boat and gets him to leave in the middle of the night, and we end the story with actually Jephson quite clearly being himself close to death, which is the explanation, I think, why he's saying his lungs are weaker at this point, and he explains that turn to your map of Africa, there above Cape Blanco, where the land trends away north and south from the westernmost points of the continent. There it is that Septimus Goring still reigns over his dark subjects, unless retribution has overtaken him. And this last third is all very heavily based on Conan Doyle's personal experience, because of course he was between October 1881 and January 1882, he served as ship's surgeon aboard the steamship Mayumba, which was carrying cargo and passengers to and from Madeira and West Africa. And he really had a terrible time of it. He really, really disliked the experience.
Yeah, there is a good degree of obviously not the voyage itself, but of autobiographical material comes in here. Particularly once we get to West Africa, it's interesting that one of the things that they notice aboard the Marie Celeste, that gives them the clue that they're off. They think they see the peak of Tenerife.
Mm.
It's very and in Memories and Adventures, Conan Doyle actually mentions the Peak of Tenerife as he's on this journey
Yes.
on the Mayumba. Something has gone through his head in the creative process where he's got the story of the Mary Celeste, and he's
Mm.
somehow knitting this together. With his own experiences aboard the Mayumba, implying the West Africa trade,
Mm.
because the experience of the Mayumba cruise for him was anything but pleasant. I mean, he contracted fever which nearly killed him. It's probably malaria.
Yeah.
And I mean, this part of West Africa was known at the time as the white man's graveyard. You know,
Mm.
the people who went out there. It was a very unpleasant, dangerous environment. And this comes across in Memories and Adventures that this was no pleasure cruise.
Yeah. Well, he actually describes it as being the death-like impression of Africa grew on me, is what he says in
Mm,
Memories and
mm,
Adventures. That is throughout it. The whole thing is very negative. I mean, he has some very unpleasant descriptions of some of the other people on board the ship. He describes the two black people on board in the party very unfavorably.
mm,
And while all of his descriptions of the people on board, of whatever ethnicity, he bases them on their actions, you definitely get more of the racial overtones there when he's coming to physical descriptions of people as well. It makes really uncomfortable reading.
mm,
But one of the people that he did meet on this voyage was a really interesting chap called Henry Highland Garnet, who was an American abolitionist, himself a born into slavery in Maryland. Had an amazing life. So he came on the voyage as the U.S. consul for Liberia, and Conan Doyle records meeting Garnet and describes him as rather a well-read, intelligent fellow. Had a long chat with him about American and English literature, Emerson, Prescott,
mm.
Irving, Bancroft, and Motley. He then goes on to say he was as black as your hat, however.
Yes.
That word, however, doing quite a lot of lifting in that sentence. Um, but when Conan Doyle comes to think again about this experience of meeting Garnet 40 years later when he writes Memories and Adventures, you do get the sense that this could have been a pivotal moment, a
Mm,
transitional moment for Conan Doyle. He describes how Garnet came on board as a passenger. He said, "My starved literary side was eager for
mm,
good talk, and it was wonderful to sit on deck discussing Bancroft and Motley, and then suddenly realize that you were talking to one who had possibly been a slave himself and was certainly the son of slaves." And he goes on to say, "This gentleman did me good, for a man's brain is an organ for the formation of his own thoughts and also for the digestion of other people's, and it needs fresh fodder." And I do think that the experience of meeting Henry Highland Garnet was formative in that
mm.
sense. And Garnet, as I said before, his influence is cast over this story.
It's a very odd. I'm going to say this whole story. It's just clashes for me. And it is like Goring is a reimagined version of Henry Highland Garnet if Garnet had let bitterness
Yes,
take him over.
yes.
And it is there's also an element going on here because Goring is mixed race.
Mm,
I don't know, is Conan Doyle trying to say some of this, the bad side of him is the white man?
possibly.
Is his father
Mm,
coming out in him? So I can't work this story out in that sense
yes,
because you're getting mixed messages. And you have got those. Yes, Garnet will have rewired Doyle's brain a bit,
yeah,
but at this point, not enough.
no,
Because there's still plenty of the stereotypes and the unpleasant side is there in this story that Doyle, like so many of his class and time, it's just ingrained.
yes, it is. Undeniably, this is a story of its time. It's also a story that is racist. It's rooted in an experience of West Africa that was that of a young Victorian man brought up with particular prejudices and beliefs. And while we might think that Conan Doyle did change his beliefs in meeting Henry Highland Garnet, he probably didn't change them enormously. But certainly by the time of Memories and Adventures, he's realized that it was probably a quite pivotal
Mm.
encounter. And so there are lots of stereotypes in Habakuk Jephson's statement that are difficult to read for modern audiences, and would have been difficult to read for black audiences at the time, of course. I think there's also an element to which the story does sort of undermine some of those things as well. For all Goring is a mass murderer, Conan Doyle does have him present the consequences of the oppression of black peoples on white audiences. That's what Owen Dudley Edwards points out. It is something that would be inherently uncomfortable. And yes, it is still in the mode of melodrama, but it's still making a point. And we've got to think, we're not far away here from The Yellow Face, which is extolling the marriage of black and white. And around the same time, we get The Five Orange Pips, in which he strips away completely all the symbolism and the romanticism around the ideas of the Ku Klux Klan to reveal them as being thugs. So, as with all of these things, it's not straightforward.
In some ways, it's uncomfortable because he's also trying to have it both ways.
Well, that's right.
And that's where it kind of comes unstuck. In that he's using Goring in the way you've just described, but he's also presented as a classic melodramatic villain.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the sort of character, and these sort of stories carried on. This is the sort of character Ian Fleming would have put into a Bond story. That those sort of elements are in there. So you can see Doyle he's trying to put these some degree of progressive ideas into this, but he's also shackled by the sort of fiction that he's writing, the sort of audience that he thinks he's writing for.
Yeah.
There are complexities here together with cliches, stereotypes, and it all hangs together a bit uncomfortably because Doyle doesn't quite know what he wants it to be. It's a story I would recommend people to read with a warning.
Yeah.
I'd say to read this, but just understand this is very much of its time. There's a lot that's not praiseworthy in it, but there are some very interesting ideas. There's some attempts at progression.
Yeah,
but it's just done in a clumsy way.
Yeah, having it both ways, I think, is a very good summation of J. Habakuk Jephson's statement. So that brings us to the end of J. Habakuk Jephson's statement. If you want to read the show notes, you can find them at doingsofdoyle.com. And if you want to discover how to become a patron or supporter of the podcast, you can find that at the website as well. So, Paul, what are we looking at next month?
Next month, we're back to Sherlock Holmes, but perhaps not one of his finest moments. We'll be looking at the play, The Crown Diamond, and its transformation into a short story as the Mazarin Stone. So that will give us plenty to chew over, I think.
Just a bit, I think. Okay, until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
I'm rather glad that we don't know exactly what fate befell the crew of the Marie Celeste, because the answer might be boringly simple. I heard a story recently about a deserted luxury yacht found drifting in the Mediterranean. It turned out that its crew and passengers had all gone for a midnight swim, and someone had forgotten to lower the ladder.